Welcome back to WHDT World News. We're talking with Peter Byrne. He's an investigative journalist who's been looking into Dianne Feinstein and her husband and the conflicts of interest in their selling off of U.S. Post Office property. Peter, before we're going to the break, we're going to talk about the interference that they have had with the Post Office. And I also want to ask you, how much money is on the table here? Where is it coming from? Where are the percentage cuts, and whose pockets is it going in?
Okay, let's take the money thing first. I mean, the properties are currently valued by the post office at $85 billion. That doesn't mean they're going to sell them all. They'll probably just sell a small percentage of them. They intend to sell several $100 million worth, and they've already sold about $232 million worth. The way that the money is made by CBRE is twofold. One, it makes money by charging a commission on the sales. It was awarded the contract saying that it could charge up to 6% of the amount of the sale. And it is also allowed, and this is extraordinary, to represent not only the post office in the sales negotiations, but also the buyers. Guess who gets the short end of the stick in those deals? It gets to keep all of the commission, represent both parties in what are clearly non-arm's length real estate transactions.
Okay, so let me just backtrack now. You just said that CBRE is going to be giving a commission to the broker. They're going to be
CBRE is the broker.
CBRE is the broker. They're going to be receiving a commission, and they're also, both sides of the deal, the sale and the purchase, are getting.
CBRE is representing both the buyer and the seller in many of the transactions, which breaks the fundamental ethical rule of real estate transactions, which is that your agents each represent the best interests of their clients. One agent represents the best interests of the seller. One agent represents the best interests of the buyer. You don't have one agent representing the best interests of two people at the same time, obviously.
Where's the National Real Estate Association on this?
Well, actually, I did talk to experts there who were very knowledgeable about all of this, and they say that, of course, all transactions should be done by agents that do not have dual allegiances. I mean, this is just a fundamental rule of ethics in real estate. But that's only a little bit of it. There's not even that much money involved in that. That's just a few $1 million. Where the real corruption is involved in this is that in at least 20% of the cases that I examined, CBRE was selling these properties to its own business partners, to its own clients, and even to development partnerships that included itself. And it was selling it to them at bargain basement prices. And this brings us to the fundamental conflict of interest in this investigation.
So now they're fixing the prices.
The contract that CBRE has with the post office requires it to sell these properties at fair market values. CBRE is also allowed, strangely enough, by the contract to say what the fair market value is. They would not tell me what the fair market values that CBRE said were. They said, when I requested that under Freedom of Information Act, that was actually tantamount to a national security secret. There was commercially sensitive information, even though the deals were over, and that it was tantamount to a national security secret, which is insane. Of course, it's not. It's just a real estate deal.
Wait. But who said this was akin to a national security situation?
Christopher Claypack, who's the general counsel of the United States Postal Service, and his staff told me repeatedly that they could not tell me what values CBRE had put on these properties as fair market values.
But how could they equate national security with this situation? National security is generally used in terms of terrorism and national disasters. How can they equate this?
Well, it's a prostitution of the term, is it not? Of course it's not equated. And, if I had the wherewithal to go to court and sue them over it, I'm sure that I would prevail. But I chose to do another route to pull the covers off of this scam because I could not find from them what they thought the fair market value was. I did obtain from them a list of all the properties that CBRE had sold on behalf of the post office and also the buyers that it was representing at the same time. and it said how much it had sold them for, when, to whom, and gave me the address. With that data, I was able to go online and using the telephone as well, and I obtained the assessed value for every single one of those 52 properties. It took a long time. But what I determined in the end was that CBRE was selling most of these properties, 85% of them, far, far under their assessed values. Now, let me explain to your viewers, if you don't already know, the assessed value of a property is generally far, far, far under the fair market value. The assessed value is usually the price at which it was last sold, which could be a year ago or it could be 20 years ago, with perhaps small annual increments added to it. Even in a down real estate market, such as what we've been seeing over the past few years until 2 years ago, assessed values are lowered so that people aren't taxed for values that don't exist. They rise and fall with the market. So what I was able to show was that CBRE sold for $166 million, 52 properties that actually were assessed at $232 million. To give you an example, in Boston, CBRE sold properties that were assessed at over $12 million for $2 million less than their assessed value. The fair market value of those properties, which was in a redevelopment district called the Seaport district, could have been $40 million for all I know. But here's the kicker. It sold it to a development partnership, Commonwealth Ventures, in which it was a partner, in which it is engaged as a real estate partner, and in which it stood to gain a profit by selling to itself, to its own partnership, properties.
So CBRE
that
jumped in Boston. CBRE jumped in and dumped the price, sold it to themselves so that they could develop the property.
Sold it to a partnership that included themselves. And that's only one of the properties that they sold there. Another property they sold was to Goldman Sachs. Now that's very interesting because Blum Capital Partners owns about 6.9% or so of CBRE, which is a more or less controlling chunk of stock. But Goldman Sachs owns almost as much. So Goldman Sachs is essentially an owner of CBRE along with Blum Capital. So that's a direct conflict of interest when you sell a piece of property, especially when it's public property, to your owner. Who are you going to get the best deal for, the post office or your owner?
Fascinating stuff here. I'm curious now, where's the accountability? What has been the effect of your investigations? Has any lawsuits been filed? Is what they're doing, even though it's a conflict of interest, is it illegal?
I say, and I've said on radio, and I'll say it again, that I gave the U.S. attorney in any one of these districts a blueprint for an indictment. Now, I'll just give you one more example.
Where's the indictment going to fall on? Feinstein?
No, I actually think that the indictment should be of post office officials that allowed this to happen, specifically the head of the real estate division, who happens to be worth upwards of 90 some odd $million, which is kind of interesting.
Start at the top at the post office, real estate division of the post office.
Go to CBRE, and I mean they're in bed with the post office on this, so I'm sure that there's no dearth of possible indictees in this or possible malfeasors in this. I mean,
is there a prosecutor that would be willing to take up this case?
No. Are you kidding? I mean,
so the American people are left holding the bag. No one's gonna hold them accountable.
No, this sort of thing goes on all the time. I mean, look at the Department of Defense. I mean, look at General Services Administration. There's so much corruption going on in the federal government that you turn over any rock and criminals crawl out. What makes this kind of interesting is that everybody's kind of concerned about the post office. I mean, towns all across America are waking up and suddenly their post office has been closed and sold to a boutique owner, and they can't mail a letter anymore. Now, people are starting to get a little mad about that. I'll give you one example that will really enrage people. In St. Paul, Minnesota, there's a huge 17-story office building, the Eugene McCarthy building, that was assessed in 2009 at $25 million. That That wasn't its fair market value, which could have been twice that. That was its assessed value. And it was actually, I'll restate that. That was its fair market value, because in that case, the assessor did say that was the fair market value of it, $25 million. CBRE sold that in August for $5.2 million.
So wait, go back to that. What was the assessed value?
$25 million.
$25 million assessed value for...
And it was sold for $5.2 million.
And
so,
the buyer, was there also a conflict with the CBRE being a partnership?
I don't know about that, because I can only, go so far with this type of investigation in terms of how deep you dig. But, CBRE has real estate agents in every town in America, and you know how realtors work. They're always, swapping deals back and forth and stuff like that. And, somebody says, well, I'll give you a good deal on this, you give me a good deal on that. We'll never know all those kinds of details. But I mean, seriously, are we really looking to uphold the real estate industry in America as some kind of ethical paradigm? I mean, remember the prime, the meltdown that happened in 2008 because real estate agents and banks were scamming the American people right and left. I mean, this hasn't stopped. And Blum's companies have been right in the forefront of all this type of scamming. I mean, I detail a lot of that in the book, Going Postal.
So let's jump over to the Obama administration. I'm curious as to where they stand on this and what actions they've taken.
Well, interestingly enough, in July, the Post Office's Inspector General came out with a report. Basically, he didn't uncover all the stuff I did because they're fairly tepid in their investigations. But he basically said there's all sorts of possibilities of fraud here, and there's all sorts of conflicts of interest going on. Now, the thing is, Inspector Generals in the federal government say that type of thing all the time, and then nobody pays any attention. They go, how interesting, they put it in the circular file, which is clearly what's going on here. I mean, the idea that the Obama administration would take any action to affect the family of Dianne Feinstein, who is one of his primary political pillars, is ludicrous. The Obama administration does the bidding of Goldman Sachs more than probably any other entity in the globe, and Goldman Sachs is an owner of CBRE, and Feinstein is the chair of the Senate so-called Intelligence Committee, which is greenlighting the National Security Agency to listen to this phone call and every other piece of electronic communication in the world. So no, there's no political will to take this on. However, if the American people get annoyed enough about it, and it's something that is happening in front of their eyes, their very own post office is something that you can see when it's closed down and turned into a restaurant, then maybe this will be an opportunity for people to do some grassroots organizing and demand some justice in this, because the Obama administration is probably not any more or less corrupt than the Bush or the Clinton, or go on back to Grover Cleveland or Warren T. Harding. I mean, presidents are always making deals with the people that give them money, and those deals very seldom redound to the benefit of ordinary people in America. Now, this is a case where if people took the bull by the horns, I have laid out in tremendous detail in 52 towns across America how CBRE and the post office are ripping off the American people.
So bottom line it for me, how much money is going to be going into their pockets? Feinstein and Blum.
Well, in terms of commissions, CBRE will probably pull down anywhere from $3 to $5 million a year in commissions. So I don't know. Blum gets whatever percentage of that he gets in terms of dividends, and that also goes to his wife, because in California she automatically owns 50% of whatever he owns. But the biggest benefit to CBRE and the Blum empire, as I call it, is the deals that it makes with other real estate entities in these development projects that concern post offices, because these post offices tend to be in downtown central areas that are incredibly valuable, especially when they're redeveloped, which happens, every couple of decades all across America, from small towns to big cities. These are key pieces of real estate. They're key to multi-million-dollar deals that otherwise would not happen. unless these post offices were sold. So that's where we had to look to find it's a smoking gun. You want to find out the dead corpses, go look in the redevelopment deals in small towns across America and cities like Boston as well, St. Paul.
All right, Peter, thanks for joining us today and giving us the inside information on this deal. And we'd love to have you back on to talk about some more of your investigations.
Anytime.
All right, that was Peter Byrne right here on WHDT World News, digging up the facts for you. Stay tuned. We still have the rest of today's headlines. We've got all the news from Hollywood, California, and a full report on the weather coming up right here on WHDT. Stay tuned.